If you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. And of course, be sure to give the video a like as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that. And now, the Sunday address. We're going to be going into our Holy Day season soon, where we commemorate our heroes and sheroes and celebrate the people who stood for righteousness, our righteousness. But as for this Sunday address, we're going to be keeping our focus on keeping our focus. Over the past 15 plus years, we've seen a number of changes brought about by the black grassroots. These changes have been incremental, and while that's not dramatic progress, it has still been progress. When we started this effort over 15 years ago, we had a lot of people who didn't like what it was that we were doing, a lot more than would like to admit to it. And the main goals that we set out, which was to make sure that we took control of the social and political discourse in the black community and to elevate the debate, that didn't appeal to a lot of people. Because prior to our coming along and starting to make some headway, we had an absolute wasteland that was supposed to be qualifying as discourse for us. We knew from the very beginning that we had a very, very long journey ahead of us. But as the old saying goes, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And as Dr. John Henrik Clarke said, if you know that you got a project in front of you that's going to take 10 or so years to do, you get started today, you ain't got but 9 years and 364 days to go. And so we did. We began putting in the work, and the needle has begun to move. Now, there's been a lot of Negroes who found a comfortable place under white supremacy, and a lot of folks who apparently have conditioned themselves to have an appetite for degeneracy, and the kind of discourse that we've been forwarding they don't like. So when they see us doing things like fighting for reparations, these are the people who said that was never going to happen. It would never even become a political issue. And when it did, they were the ones who were sitting there going, well, what am I going to get? You shouldn't be getting anything. The people who have been out here fighting against our interests and are still lurking around, you can tell who these people are because they're the ones who even now have decided they're going to be pushing back against us and resisting our efforts. It's been this way since the plantations. That's why the incremental progress is so important, because these changes have been permanent changes. What's different about us is that what we've done wasn't achieved by going through any of these corrupt and crumbling old decrepit organizations. They're the ones who put out these shills and plants and bootlicks who come amongst us for the sake of trying to undermine our morale and to take our eye off the ball. See, we recognize these old corrupt dinosaurs for what they were. We recognized them a long time ago. And we put in the work to discredit them. And that's what's been happening. That's why they've been forced to try to figure out how do they branch out to any and everyone else. They're trying to go to immigrants. They're trying to go to intersectionalists. They're trying to basically become a women's rights organization. Anything and everything except for black. See, when black folks finally stand up and start speaking on our own interests, everyone's going to be forced to have to declare where they stand. The people who are against black empowerment from the very beginning, they're not going to change their tune and say, oh yeah, finally some black folks who are standing up and standing on business. We need to get behind this is the message that we've been pushing all along. That's not what they've been saying. What they've been saying instead is, these far leftist radicals, these people online, oh my God, somebody needs to rein them in. They start talking like nigga Jim Clyburn. Stop sloganizing. Yeah. When black folks finally start talking the kind of talk that threatens white supremacy and undermines the system, you find the Negroes who have been thinking to themselves they had a comfortable place under white supremacy, then they show their true colors. They're not fighting against these white supremacists, they're fighting against us, which is what they've been doing from the very beginning. But now we've been forced to have to go ahead and take off the mask and show where they've always stood and expose themselves to everyone. It undermines what little legitimacy or credibility that the white media and white power in general might have bestowed on them. But there's also been another enemy, far more subtle and insidious. It's easy to see the nigga Jim Clyburns. It's easy to see the Michael Steeles. It's easy to see the Al Sharptons and such. But these little agents that they got running around here, they're the ones who think to themselves that they're being slick. One of the things that I put an emphasis on was to teach you how to understand exactly how these political campaigns lead to these horrible administrations that we keep getting. I know that it's not exactly the sexiest thing in the world, but I want you to understand that these Negroes who you see out here fighting against our interests, the vast majority of them are simply looking for a job, literally. Simone Sanders lied through her teeth for Joe Biden, lying about the 94 crime bill, lying about the mass incarceration that it began and perpetuated. And why did she do it? Because she was trying to get a White House job. And why did she want that? It didn't pay very much and didn't mean anything, but it did enable her to get what she really wanted, which was a way to burnish her resume. That's what these sellouts and bootlicks are doing. They're selling black people up the river just so they can try to get themselves a job. And it's not just Simone Sanders. You got a lot of these sorry Negroes who are out here doing this mess, clowns who you see as volunteers for this or that political campaign, all of them trying to find their angle, trying to find their in. Some of those A-dunce clowns were doing the same thing. These people are out here for themselves. They're not out here for black people. And that's important, because these are the same kind of shameless scumbags who, whenever we upset the apple cart and ruin their chance to get themselves some gainful employment for the first time in their lives, working for some Democrat who they helped to shill into office, they start attacking us. Whenever you hear people sitting here saying, y'all need to be offering solutions, we do. We have all along. What they don't like is the fact that these solutions don't involve snuggling up like a house pet under white mommy and white daddy. That's what they don't like. They're trying to find a comfortable place under white supremacy, and none of the solutions that we bring have anything to do with that. Black folks have been trying to integrate their way into power, and the only thing we've done is integrate our way out of power. We need to have machines and apparatuses that we control, that work in our interest, and that's only going to be coming from us. So these people who you see like to be posting comments or the anonymous message saying, what about solutions? They've been doing this mess for 15 years, and they've been doing it heavy ever since Kamala lost. That's been y'all up here dancing on her political grave. Y'all need to be offering solutions. We do it all the time. They don't like the fact that our solutions are not going to be feeding them, because black empowerment is not meant to feed the bootlick or the backstabber or the traitor or the shill or the plant. These are the people that we're trying to get ourselves away from. These are the people who have attacked and opposed us from day one. I know, because I've been out here for 15 plus years and they've been singing the same song. We said that we could take control of the economic and political discourse in the black community, and they said that it was impossible because they were the ones fighting against us. And here we are 15 years later. And now they're screaming and yelling and claiming that, well, y'all up here with all of this influence, y'all up here doing all this mess, y'all just fighting. So you do understand what it is that we've been doing, and you've also understood the impact as well. They all do. As the old saying goes, when people ask for advice, it's usually because they already know the answer, but wish that they didn't. And the same thing goes for the shills, the plants, the bootlicks, and the lurkers who sit here talking about solutions. They already know the answers. The real question is, what have any of them done to move us towards our goal? What they say is, well, black folks needs to vote. Voting means nothing if you don't have a candidate who's on the ballot who's actually going to do things for you. Otherwise, it becomes an empty civic exercise. Question of these shills and plants is, what have they done to make sure that we have an actual choice on the ballot? What have they done to make sure that people who are absolutely rock-ribbed and steel-spined, fire-breathing black empowerment types are actually on the ballot? What have they done for that? These are the very people who sit here and say that's unelectable. These are also the same people who said that all of these bought and paid for Negroes who the white media put on, like the breakfast schlubs and others, that these guys, they were supposed to be our voice, and that we would have to just deal with that and deal with them. There was no way to get around them. These were also the people who said that reparations would never become an actual political issue. Nobody would even pretend to do any legislation about it. Nobody would even talk about it. It would be completely and thoroughly dismissed. And we've been telling you the entire time, the only reason that reparations was not an issue was because we were not letting it become an issue. We were sitting here playing the game of, well, it's too controversial. We need to wait and see if we just, and as soon as we stepped across the line, the first thing we found was you had these people sitting here going, well, here's something that you can call reparations. So it wasn't the certain political poison that we've been told that it was. It wasn't the third rail of politics, was it? And far from people sitting here going, we're not even going to discuss that. Instead, what they were saying was like Bernie Sanders, it's not feasible. Or like Kamala Harris, well, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm only going to do something that's going to benefit black people, but none of them said that A, there wasn't the money for it, or B, it was impossible, or that, oh my God, that's absolutely ridiculous. They weren't saying that. They were saying the opposite. See, the difference between what is politically impossible and what happens to be a political policy is whether or not there's enough people who say we're going to make this into part of the political discourse. If you act like you're ashamed of talking about things, or if you act like you're bashful or shy or self-conscious about it, then you've told the enemy that they're in the driver's seat. And where they're going to take you is straight back into bondage. On the other hand, if you make it very clear you don't care what anyone thinks about it, it's about what you want, then the political landscape tends to adjust to that. There is nothing so politically irresistible as a people who have a big idea and they also have big courage to push that idea. There's no substitute for that. Now, with Kamala Harris having gone to her political end, the question now is, what happens next? You know, it reminds me of Hurricane Carter. You probably saw that Denzel Washington movie with him about 20 years ago or so. Hurricane Carter was a boxer who had been framed for a crime that he didn't commit. Well, back in the late 60s, when Hurricane Carter was put in prison, there were a lot of people who made a lot of noise about getting him out of there. They knew that he and those other men were put in prison for no reason. They knew that. They knew that it was just the cops being cops, but just the racist thugs in blue doing what they do. And that being the case, there were a lot of protests, a lot of demonstrations, a lot of people speaking on his behalf. But of course, white supremacy being so deeply entrenched, as far as they were concerned, this man was a political prisoner. He was their trophy, and they wanted to show, yeah, we could put innocent black people in prison, and there's nothing you can do to get them out. It was a show of white supremacy's little power. Reuben Carter had a saying for that. What he said was that all the big demonstrations that took place in the 60s, trying to get him out of prison, all of the attention that was on him, he called that the noisy revolution. But what happened afterwards, and continued to happen afterwards, small efforts by anonymous people who actually happened to continue afterwards, he called that the quiet revolution. That's what happened when all the cameras were gone. And the masses of people who had a whole lot of energy and a whole lot of enthusiasm at the beginning, when those people finally peeled off and they went home. It's like in the Bible. Bible says that people get wrapped up in the cares of this world, and that's why so many people happen to be useless when it comes to changing things. But that's what's happening with black empowerment. I told you that the white supremacists have a short con and a long con. They got a short game and a long game. Well, when it comes to the black grassroots, we got a short game and a long game too. That's why it's analogous to Reuben Carter's noisy revolution and quiet revolution. The short game is the noisy revolution. It gets people's attention. It happens to put our efforts on the map. And it makes it where people are looking in this direction and going, hey, there actually is an alternative. But keep in mind, most of those people who happen to be very enthused at the beginning, if they don't immediately get results or immediately see the promised land open up in front of them, then they'll go back to Xbox or Tyler Perry reruns or what have you. That's the way that the world works. It's always been that way because it's usually not the masses of people who change things. It's that small, determined few. It's the people who understand the need to dig their heels in for the long haul. Those are the ones who actually choose things. And to them should go the credit and the glory. They've earned it. See, Hurricane Carter got out of prison in the 1980s. But it wasn't the big demonstrations and such that did that. That put him as an issue on the map. It let people know that there was an injustice that needed to be rectified. But it was the people who dug in their heels for the long haul. They were the ones who finally set that man free. You see, the long game may not be as sexy as the short game, because the short game is the one that people are looking at. And it seems to be flashy and such. But it's the long game that actually wins the game. And that's where we are now. It was never about Barack Obama. It was never about Hillary Clinton. It was never about Donald Trump. It was never about Kamala Harris or Joe Biden or any of the rest of those fools. It has always been about us. That's what the focus is. You are the ones who we've been fighting over. All of these years, 15 plus years, yeah, that's a hell of a long game now, isn't it? But when you look at the results, you can't argue with the fact that there is no substitute for persistence. There just isn't, and there's not going to be. So what is it that we're demanding? We have a lot of demands. But in a nutshell, and I don't do sound bites, but in a nutshell, you can basically say this. Our demands are reparations and the permanent economic provisions that we are owed by benefit of the fact that we're citizens. Secondly, an absolute end to the targeted economic deprivation that we're subjected to. And speaking of putting an end to things, an end to the over-policing that we have been made to suffer. Everything from police harassment to disproportionate arrests to mass incarceration, all that falls under over-policing. Now, those are the demands that we make when it comes to the policymakers. Because the situation that we are in is not natural at all. It is an artificial situation, completely and thoroughly created as a result of public policy, persistent and deliberate policies placed upon us for the sake of injuring us, to manufacture an artificial racial hierarchy with us at the bottom. And even though this hierarchy may be artificial, the damage it does to us is only too real. But those are just a few of the external demands. With that, we're also going to have internal demands, things that we demand or require from other black people. Such as when it comes to economics, group economics must be practiced. As black people, we have to make sure that we don't force each other to have to compete in the so-called free market. Because as long as white supremacy still stands, so-called capitalism will be nothing more than a thinly veiled version of white economic maldistribution of the wealth. Under white supremacy, that's all it can ever be because that's all it was ever meant to be. And I know, especially for those of you who like to consider yourselves business people, I'm sorry to disillusion you like this, but the reality is that under white supremacy, your precious free market is nothing more than an economic whorehouse. And the goal is to make sure that as many black people as possible are financially turned out. And a lot of them physically so. We're going to have to make sure that black people start getting comfortable with other black people making demands of the group, the right demands. Because that's how you take control of the social discourse within the group. Who's going to be talking? The people who have the most sense are the ones who need to be talking, so that's why we got to speak up. But it's important that just like with our black media, when we start talking to black people, that internal discourse, we got to make sure that we say the right things. Now, the next moves that are going to have to be taking place, starting at the local level, because all politics is local, is going to be getting this hard-nosed, uncompromising message of true black empowerment into the halls of power. See, right now you got a safe space in American politics. All of American politics is a safe space for anti-black racism. There is nobody who's preaching a pro-black empowerment message and nobody who pushes back in any substantive way against the anti-black rhetoric. That has to change. And don't expect the white media to celebrate the individuals who we do get in there, because that is going to come if we make that our focus. It's going to be difficult in the beginning. But then again, it's been difficult the entire 15 years. None of this has been easy. That's what needs to be understood. These sorry fools and shills who you see talking about solutions, these are the very ones whenever you tell them, here's what needs to be done, they start telling you why they can't do it, it won't work, don't need to be done, let's do something else. So you never wanted solutions in the first place. What you wanted was to just basically disagree for the sake of disagreeing. But if and when black people start talking in a substantive way about getting this message into the halls of power, expect to see all hell break loose. Now, they're going to try to ignore it, as they tried to ignore us for 15 years, as they tried to ignore us in the beginning, see if we can get it to go away. That's what they'll be doing. And don't expect the first tries to work. It never goes that way. Changes take time, especially when you happen to be an oppressed minority fighting against a far more powerful entrenched majority. That's always going to be a long, hard fight. But whether or not you win it depends on whether or not you're going to be persistent. So don't expect the white media to acknowledge what we're doing. In fact, you shouldn't look for that at all. Every time they do acknowledge us, it's just to attack us. And that's going to be happening too in time. Are they going to break our resolve? No, they're not. Because you're not going to let it. Now, the Democrats right now are trying to flood the zone. They're trying to get out ahead of what it is that we're doing because they know where this is going. So they're trying to go ahead and seed the ground for the next generation of sellouts and bootlicks with some of these so-called young black leaders who are a bunch of doggone hand-picked, cherry-picked Negroes who white power has set up and presented to serve their interests. Like those two Justins down in Tennessee who were ready to get expelled from the state legislature for gun control, but they wouldn't bust a grape for reparations. Or that LGBT congressman who the white media made such a big deal out of. Oh yeah, he loves to talk about transgender bathrooms, ain't saying a doggone word about an anti-black hate crime law. They don't represent the black consensus at all. That's the reason why the white media celebrates them. That's why the Democrats decided, let's go ahead and put these guys on. Let's claim that these guys have got political potential. But the white media can lie and claim that these bootlicks like the Breakfast Schlubs and Charlemagne the Fraud and others, they claim that these guys spoke for the black community, right up until the black media emerged and began speaking for ourselves. Then these sellouts and clowns and white media sock puppets had to change their message. They had to change, not us. Well, the same dynamic will go for our political representation as well. And this is a political imperative. You want to know why it is that reparations was betrayed from within in the California legislature by the very so-called legislative black caucus who claimed that they were in favor of it? It's because we don't have any of our people who are in there. We cannot say that we've taken control of the political discourse in our community until those who are our policymakers are actually our policymakers and not a gang of sellouts chosen by white power to undermine us. But let's understand something. When you start talking about actually getting into the political arena, just understand that our biggest opposition is going to be coming from a lot of these black shills and would-be political campaign volunteers and the rest of these scumbags who think to themselves that they got an in with the local Democratic Party. As far as they're concerned, they're going to be climbing the ladder. Come on, Simone Sanders and others, that's how these people start out. A lot of these folks who you see posting messages online, in the old days, they used to work phone banks for the Democrats, but now they're online, spreading their propaganda this way. Family, there are those who would very much like to get us off our square. Movements are like people. They can become tired, they can lose their determination and drift away if they allow that to happen. The people who try to bring that old, where are your solutions line, look at what they've brought us. They're invariably shills and plants, people who have no place in black empowerment and who resent it because they know that black empowerment is not going to spoon feed them anything. Black empowerment is not going to feed them. We recognize traitors when we see them, and they understand that without Kamala Harris to beg for a job, or some Democrat would-be power broker or influence peddler, without them able to do that, without them having some hope of a consulting gig with them, they know that we're not going to feed them because we don't feed those who try to take food out of our mouths. Notice how these people never ask for solutions from the breakfast schlubs. Oh, these people, they love to sit there and say, you need to stop insulting roly-poly Martin. They never ask fools like that, where are your solutions? They know what the black media solutions are, and they hate it. They never ask that of the Shade Room or Shea Butter Twitter, any of the fakers, frauds, phonies, and fools. We tell them what the solutions are, and they immediately say, I don't like that. They eat the slop straight from the trough when it comes to these other folks. And no amount of shucking and jiving and goofing off disqualifies them from speaking. These are the people who have had the mic for the longest time, and they produce nothing but ignorance. For so long, we allowed these bottom feeders to hang around us like so much lice. But the black media has been cleaning house. We've been working hard to get our house in order and make sure that it stays that way. So I want for you to rededicate yourself and focus to what it is that we're after here. Because right now, it's very easy whenever the white media is sitting here with some issue on tap, that being the case, we say, hey, they're going in this direction, we're pulling against it. That gets a lot of attention. But black empowerment is not something that happens whenever the white powers that be trot out their latest Barack Obama sellout to try to lead us astray. That's not when black empowerment happens. That's not when black unity happens. Black unity happens on a day-to-day basis. It happens in ways great and small, but it happens at the grassroots level. It happens at the local level. It's far more important what you are doing in your neighborhood than what is happening in D.C. Did you know that? Because if you had just, say, 100 black people who are hard-nosed as hell about black empowerment, and they decided they were going to build where they were, they would be starting with the next-door neighbor, starting with some people that you know at the library, starting with some people that you're familiar with at the community center, or even your church, yes, church, because there's still some black folks who don't like the pork chop preacher, but they don't see anybody who stepped across the line. See, that's the problem with bandwagons. Too many people are waiting for somebody to build the bandwagon so they can just go ahead and jump on the back of it once it's already built and rolling. Nobody wants to put in the hard work of building the bandwagon. As much as we've done, as much progress as we've made, the bulk of our work is still ahead of us. But let the fact that we've been able to make this progress at all be encouragement to you. Social upheaval and changes tend to be cyclical in nature. Just because we've passed from a period of noisy revolution to a period of perhaps quiet revolution, doesn't mean that nothing's going to be going on. We are always supposed to be looking towards each other, because the reality happens to be it doesn't really matter whatever's trending on Twitter or whatever's leading the news in the white media. Internally, we are supposed to have our own discourse going on, one that is independent and completely unconcerned with whatever the white media is talking about. And as long as we do that, then whether it's a noisy revolution or a quiet revolution, we're the ones who are going to win it. Good evening, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. BC, Reasonable Dude, Black Mama, Raquel Graham, and Leonard Cottingham. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.